Hello and welcome. My name is Dr. Pam Castor, and welcome to Leaders in Learning and Literacy, a patent webcast series. I have the honor today of welcoming William Van Clave to our webcast. Let me tell you a little bit about William before we start our discussion. William is committed to the professional development of educators across the country and around the globe. Teachers can be transformed by a deep knowledge of the English language. William provides effective and engaging training material to build teacher knowledge of content and best teaching practices to better reach their students. William is internationally recognized speaker with an interactive hands-on presentation style. He has presented on effective teaching practices at conferences and schools both in the United States and abroad since 1995. Recent projects include consulting with schools as part of a literacy grant in Montana, and right here at our very own patent, participating in the MTSS Writing Standards Committee for the state of Pennsylvania. Implementing several trainer of the trainers projects using his sentence structure approach, and writing a series of books on developing composition skills to complete his sentence approach. So we have been partnering with William for many, many years. Very, very grateful to be doing so. We love the partnership we have with him. So that's his formal introduction, but anything you want to share with our viewers, William? Anything more that's not on this lovely introduction?
Just that I'm really happy to be here and that I am grateful for my relationship with Patent, which is 5 or 6 years old now, and my work here on vocabulary and writing skills. And I'm super happy to be invited to do this with you and to talk about one of my favorite topics.
Yeah, so we're going to be talking about writing today. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the foundational skills related to writing, because that's where William has very much an expertise area. William has been partnering with the MTSS initiative and the Literacy Initiative for a number of years to bring writing to the Pennsylvania educators, along with Lena Edwards Santoro, who is his partner, along with a team here at Patent that worked for a few years actually together to develop some really nice resources. So do you mind telling us a little bit about some of the resources and the kind of the teamwork to create the resources here at Patent? And then we're going to kind of go deeply into those foundational skills related to writing, spelling and handwriting and those.
So resources are sort of like the committee and what we did build?
Okay. I mean, because that was a really
it was actually
process.
Really exciting and
right,
interesting.
Every time I talk to you about it, you go like, that was one of the best experiences I've ever had.
It really was. And I think part of it was I had never really participated in anything like that before. And Deb Fulton, your predecessor, invited me to come in and participate and be sort of a syntax lead. And then I did handwriting and spelling as well with the help of some other people.
Okay, so for folks who don't know, tell me a little bit about syntax, because that is probably one of the most misunderstood parts of the structure of our language. So I want to tell our folks about syntax, because that's really your superpower.
Sure. Okay. So I love syntax, and I think one of the neat things about syntax is that it's a micro skill, but it's also a macro skill. So there are some things that are required of it that are things like we've got to have a capital letter and we've got to have a period, but we've also got some higher level thinking things that are involved with syntax. And I'm pretty passionate about it because I think a lot of teachers jump into paragraphs, essays, writing in response to prompts, free writes, things like that, and they don't, and all those things are important, don't get me wrong, but they don't target writing at the sentence level. And one of the really exciting things about focusing on syntax is that you build better writers, but you also build kids who can comprehend better what they read. So when you teach a structure in syntax, whether you're looking at clause structure or whether you're looking at the way that parts of speech influence meaning, those pieces, they allow kids to expand and develop their writing. They allow kids to work towards preventing run-ons and fragments, but they also, when kids go into read a textbook or an essay or a paragraph, they're better able to understand some of the really dense text that writing has. And comprehension's number one contributor, what have you, is vocabulary. But the number two is syntax. It's that word order and how we devise sentences and how they're built to convey meaning in readers and writers. So it takes a decent amount of knowledge to really understand syntax, and it's a powerful tool to use in helping kids write better, read better, and also to edit their own writing.
So can you give us some specifics for teachers, like where could they enter in? Because I know oftentimes we hear about sentence combination or elaboration, but we're even talking more than
Sure.
that, correct?
So sentence combining gets a very good research effect.
Right.
There's no doubt. Pretty much everybody's in favor. Sentence expansion is also really great. I spend some time with things like parts of speech, not in a we're going to memorize the parts of speech kind of way, but in thinking about how words relate to other words.
Right.
So adjectives describe nouns. Yeah, that's all fine. But what that means is that the words that are adjectives are telling us more about the person, the place, or the thing in the sentence. And then clause structure, these groups of words, and the exciting thing about clause structure is these two clauses, these independent and dependent clauses, they combine to create a huge array of different kinds of sentences.
Yes.
So when you know about these two building blocks, and when you know how to manipulate them, it gives you this really powerful sentence repertoire, and it gives you options for sharing your ideas in writing that is super powerful for kids, and it really enables them as writers, and then that eventually impacts their ability to read sentences like that and understand what they're doing.
Yeah.
So.
I love I've seen you do this activity where we kind of move those clauses around.
Yes.
And also in training, though, I've seen where we ask folks to kind of identify, is this an independent clause or dependent clause? And I tell you, I think people really sweat. they're sweating. They're like, oh my gosh, is this independent or dependent? So I guess what's the best way to teach it?
So as I'm thinking about clause structure, these clauses, these components of language, they all contain a doer and a do, a subject and a predicate, at least at the elementary level. Later on you get into some linking verbs. And looking for these groups of words, do they have an actor and those pieces? That's the meaning piece that I'm talking about. And you are right, there are definitely teachers who have the look of fear. But the great thing is the vast majority nail this.
Yes, they do.
They get it right. Yes. And when they don't, one of my takeaways for teachers is if you're in a room with 25 kids and one kid makes a mistake and everyone else gets it right, the one person you learn from is the one who missed it.
That's right.
Because you get to figure out, not that he was wrong, that doesn't really matter, but where was his head?
What was he thinking?
And how can you shift that thinking to make that student, not make the same choice the next time when you're not in the room, when you're not available to support and help. And that's a powerful tool, not just for the kid who made the mistake, but also all of the girls and boys in the classroom who are watching that process and learning from it. So.
What are some resources or ways to step into syntax for teachers? What would you suggest?
Step Up to Writing is a great curriculum.
Okay.
If you're looking for curricula, I wrote a book called Writing Matters, which is awesome, and some workbooks. I'm really, really happy with how the book came out. I think there are other curricula out there that really build that sentence piece. But the whole premise behind my writing approach is that once you figure out the components, you instantly go to combine and expanding, and then you go to creation. So we're not going to just find a bunch of adjectives. That has no research effect. But once we do a little bit with that and we figure out the kinds of relationships they have with other words, then we can turn and we can write sentences and we can use more descriptive language. The same thing goes for anything from a phrase to a clause. Any component you learn all the way through to high school where you're messing with participles and advanced grammar, you instantly turn the ability to identify and understand them into the ability to generate, to apply them into your own writing.
And one way I've seen you kind of enter into that too is with oral language. I mean, you do all this orally before we even get to the expressive writing part, right?
Absolutely. So I had a teacher, and I obviously miscommunicated. The other day in a workshop, she came up and she said during the break, she was super nice about it, and she said, "I'm really having a good time, but I don't know how I could do this with my 5 and 6 year olds." And I said, "Oh, let me talk about that." And I'm usually good about that, but I clearly forgot. And I said, "You can do so much of this aloud.
Yes.
You don't have to break out a pen and pencil. And if you do break out a pen and pencil, maybe you're the one doing the writing."
That's right.
And the kids are generating the text and coming up with things.
And they love doing it.
Absolutely.
They love playing with language, right?
Absolutely.
And moving those clauses around and how it changes the meaning, or makes it so much more interesting or much more difficult to understand.
Yeah,
right?
and that cognitive piece, getting kids to think, not getting kids to, do the 100th sentence of let's underline all the nouns, which not only is tedious, but it doesn't impact their ability to write and read better.
Anything else you want to tell our folks about syntax?
No, but I'm super glad for the opportunity to talk about handwriting, spelling, and syntax today.
Me too.
So I was with this team and we collaborated, and I didn't know exactly how that would be. I do a lot of presenting in front of groups of people, but this was a real team effort. So there were assessment people, and there was an L consultant.
Yes.
There were people who were working with the IUs, which are the I guess cells around Pennsylvania that provide training. Is that a fair way to talk about IUs?
There are partners, intermediate units. There are 29 in Pennsylvania, and we work hand in hand with them. They are supporting our local education agencies, and we work at the state level, so we work hand in hand. So yes, it was a really collaborative team, very diverse. Yeah,
and I got to know some people. I mean, I already knew Deb a little bit, but I didn't know the other people in the committee, and it was so much fun to interact with them, to learn about them personally and professionally, and also to learn about some areas of the writing process that I had not done a deep dive on. Things like I've not done a lot with assessment, and really learning from the assessment participants in the committee. Things like that was really beneficial to me. And I feel like I gave a lot, but I feel like I got back as much as I gave.
Oh, you did give a lot. Yes, for sure. It was a very collaborative process. So I know some wonderful resources came out of there, which we'll attach to this webcast, but do you mind sharing just a few of those?
Are we talking about things like the live binder things?
The live binder, the scope and sequence.
Okay.
I mean, when I post the scope and sequence to social media, people
goes on fire. I know, that was crazy.
So if they haven't seen it yet, you need to tell them about it.
So part of what we did was build a set of tools that teachers could use. And they were meant to be sort of tools after someone had attended the training, but a lot of them are standalone for experienced teachers who know what to do with them. And I think some of the IU TACs have been able to help schools implement using some of the tools. So the thing that you mentioned before, the scope and sequence, I was on a subcommittee of 4 people, fabulous people, and we built this scope and sequence chart that really showed what grade level students should be introduced to skills and at what level they should really achieve mastery, assuming they're functioning at grade level. And it allows teachers, when they see it, they get really excited about it when we explain what's going on, because it allows teachers to kind of check their own curriculum, say, do I have everything covered? What am I missing? What are some holes I want to fill in? Am I doing something at the wrong grade level? Am I not doing something enough? How do the standardized assessments process with that as well? Because
writing is a very difficult linguistic skill, latest developing literacy skill. Oftentimes they say I think I heard a quote once, learning to write or writing is like dripping blood. I don't know, something.
Oh, wow, that sounds like a painful process. Yes, that's fair.
It can be. And I think, as teachers, many of us were not taught how to teach reading in our undergraduate or any certifications or graduate courses, but if we weren't taught reading, we certainly were not taught at all how to teach writing. For the most part, what I remember is just tell them to write. Right? More on the process end, and handwriting and spelling, which are very critical skills to both quantity and quality of writing, have, I think, in many places gone by the wayside. They say we have spell check, and why do we need to be teaching handwriting anymore? So your partner, Lena Edwards-Santoro, along with his team, Lena particularly supported like the composition skills. And in this process, you've really helped with, we call them micro and macro skills. So the composition skills were done by Lena Edwards-Santoro, and you did the micro skills. And I think for the most part, when I talk with teachers, that's the area they were least familiar with. Like this area, kind of like conceptualizing, editing, revising, those were terms that they were familiar with. But when you told them about handwriting, they really felt like, oh, but that's not really necessary any longer. And spelling, of course, we have spell check. So I guess, is that common? Because you present all across the world. Is that a common thinking? And how do you kind of combat that? Because it is absolutely critical, those foundational skills, right?
So actually, I really like doing the handwriting piece with teachers because they start from a place of such either lack of knowledge or kind of resistance to teaching it or what have you. And then you show them a little bit of research. You do a little bit of hands-on work with them. You interact with them, and you change minds. And it comes with a struggle because I'll often allow for a certain amount of time in a workshop to present on handwriting, and then they get to talking about it and thinking about it, and all of a sudden it's taken twice as long as we would have hoped in some ways, but we're glad for that because it started this discussion.
Right, kind of working through that thought process, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And when we were doing the MTSS cohort series, these teams were getting together and making genuine changes. Gosh, we need to reintroduce handwriting into the curriculum. Gosh, we need to think about, we've already got a curriculum, but we haven't been really paying attention to it, or we're not allotting the time we should, or we're not doing it often enough. And so it's neat to be able to do a training component that you can see the direct effect immediately. Like right now, I could see schools going out and making changes in practice based on that.
So for those who haven't had the good fortune to be at Patton to be a part of your training, why is handwriting so important to writing?
So researchers like Graham and Berninger have done quite a bit on the handwriting connection. And I think one of the aha moments for me when I was investigating the research is that it's not just a skill that impacts writing fluency and writing speed. The research also says that it benefits spelling and reading. And that may sound counterintuitive, but those language links in the brain, when you're forming letters, it's different from drawing a picture. You know, when you're forming letters, you are really connecting the reading, the writing, the spelling networks all. And so Berninger's most recent studies in 2016, they indicated that kids with an embedded handwriting component into their curriculum, they had larger reading, spelling, and writing gains than groups that did not have the embedded instruction. And I think that's an aha moment. A light bulb goes off when you talk to teachers about that.
Yeah, and that graphomotor piece too?
Yeah,
Yes.
so my mentor, Diana Hanbury King, who passed away several years ago, she was a huge proponent of multisensory or multimodal handwriting practice. And really activating that graphomotor, that automaticity, really teaching the body the spellings of words and the formations of the letters. And the idea behind that is what Graham and the researchers call reducing cognitive overload.
Yes, yeah.
So if we can automatize the way we form letters, when we go to do a sentence or a paragraph, when we go to read about something and then write about it, we don't have to spend working memory on formation of letters, on thinking about what a T looks like. That should really be automatized so that we can focus on the idea that we're trying to
Same
express.
thing like when we're coming to a word that we don't know, we have to slow down and decode it. We don't have that cognitive desk space.
Exactly.
Right? And so I know one thing that you do, and you can do this too at home. So write with your non-dominant hand. And this is something you just give a brief topic. I'll write about my summer vacation or what have you. Give yourself 3 minutes to write with your non-dominant hand and notice how it slows down your thinking. The participants, when they do it, they tell us, like, I started choosing easier words, shorter words, and so it kind of puts you back to that, that little kid when you were learning how to form the letters and how both the quantity, this is what our participants say, the quantity of what I put out and the quality of what I put out is just so vastly different because I don't have it, I do with this hand, I have it automatized, but this one is slowing me down so much that I'm using all my cognitive desk space to just kind of form the letters. So I'm writing less robust and I'm writing less quantity. So try it at home.
Yeah, so Lena's done that in the workshops, and when she does that,
it's a big
the look of horror on the participants, first they're like, you want me to do what?
Right.
And then sort of that attempt. And you also will have a few participants who say, I just couldn't do that, period.
And it's like 3 minutes, yeah.
Yeah.
And you can see, like, that 3 minutes is really agonizing.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I think it brings it home how important handwriting is to that automaticity so that we can really focus on the content and the meaning of what we're trying to convey in writing, right?
Right. You're expecting your pre-K, your K, your first and second graders, you're expecting them to be spending some time on thinking about letter formation. But as they get older and as that process speeds up, they really shouldn't. And you'll find struggling writers, they keep that letter formation in their working memory. It's not automatic, and that makes other aspects of the writing process suffer.
Okay, so the other big one when we think of micro skills is the spelling. And for many people, spelling, with the advent of technology and spell check, they just think, well, I don't need to be teaching spelling anymore. And for the most part, when I talk to teachers about spelling, it's like I ask them, tell me about your spelling if you have it at all. And usually it's, okay, on Monday we get a set of questions. Sometimes they're related to the text and have no spelling pattern at all to them.
Right.
Maybe what they're reading. And they memorize maybe 10 of them. And then on Friday, they give the tests, and then on Saturday, the kids forget them for the most part. So, I always say this when I'm training, like if I put up the word onomatopoeia, would you be able to read it? Yes, it's a sight word for you. Would you be able to spell it?
No.
So no,
Right.
they wouldn't. And so spelling helps us analyze the linguistic structure of a word all the way through that word. So because if we can spell a word, we can read it, but not conversely. We don't go reciprocal
Right.
in that, right? It's such a more demanding skill. But I
And that's
guess-
why you'll see when you have strugglers, you'll see their decoding skills go up. And their spelling skills, they'll go up, but not as much. And I've had academic language therapists and tutors say to me, gosh, I'm a failure as a tutor, the spelling isn't going up. I'd be like, no. The fact that the decoding moves up more quickly makes sense because
easier skill.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are fewer options. If you see a vowel team like AI, you're really going to say A. But if I say A to you and ask you to spell it, you've got a number of
ways.
options.
E-A, many.
Right,
Yes.
and there are some rules to help you guide, but some of it is really kind of a luck of the draw kind of thing as well.
Now you've done two, of course you've been with this long-term and training series, but you also have done 2 webinars that we'll link to this on handwriting and spelling. So tell me where you've seen spelling done well and successfully, and some of the misconceptions that teachers typically have. It's again, this is like a no shame zone. It's not to say. It's just that when we know better, we do better.
Sure,
right?
absolutely.
So what do you see out in the field, and how does spelling contribute to both writing and to reading?
Well, so I would add, you mentioned as you started our spelling portion talking about teachers and practices, but I also think we have a lot of principals who need to shift their thinking a little bit as well.
Parents too. It's a big shift for
Yeah.
parents. I know when
So-
schools shift their spelling, usually they have a parent meeting to
explain what's going
because
on.
they're used to like the Monday,
Parents
Friday.
love drilling the spelling, spelling words to kids
Yes.
because it's a very concrete, kind of direct black and white thing they can do, and the kids can go out and score well and what have you. What we want though is a spelling approach that will actually build that ability, not just the knowledge of the 10 words on the given week. So. Spelling's hard, and it's hard as a teacher as well because you have to know a decent amount of information about the language.
Yes.
And there are 3 levels. You're going to want to know the phonology or the sound system, and you're going to want to know the orthography, the way it's patterned, and various spelling rules. And then one of the most exciting parts for me anyway is the morphology or the meaning parts. And so you really need all 3 of those, and to be a competent speller, and also to be a competent teacher of spelling. Because what you'll find in our language, unlike some others, like Italian, which has a one-to-one correspondence, the sounds are all represented by one symbol, and the symbols are all, they all make one sound. In English, we have to sort of be able to shift our problem solving. Sometimes we're going to need to rely on phonology. Sometimes phonology or the sound system won't really help us, and we're going to have to shift over to something else. So, the favorite word amongst people who are playing with morphology is a word like the number 2. Which has that pesky W in it. And what do you do with that? Well, you don't want to pronounce it two.
Right.
But if you can make a meaning association and think about something like twin. Or twice, that can be a game changer for kids.
It makes sense then for the kids. Yes.
Absolutely. But you have to know a decent amount of the language. You have to understand a decent amount of the language to, first of all, to know how best to instruct, but also to share with kids the generalizations, the patterns, the systems to make it work.
And oftentimes we're not taught that. Right. So when you're talking, all I keep thinking is structured literacy.
Yes.
Right? The systems of our language, the more a child knows about the word, its phonology, orthography, morphology, the semantics of the word, all that. What a difference that makes.
Absolutely.
So I guess what suggestions would you have for teachers if they watch this and they say, okay, this is the way I've been doing spelling and handwriting. What are some suggestions, I guess, to, of course, watch your webinars that you did here at Patton, and if you're lucky, of course, join one of our series in writing. But what are some ways that teachers can kind of maybe go talk to their principal, or what are some entry points you think for shifting? Like, I need to teach handwriting, and gosh, our spelling is, a memorization type of technique. What can they do? What could they do?
So handwriting first. I think part of the deal with handwriting's a little bit like phonological awareness in that you want to do short sessions frequently. So you really, you don't want to do Monday for an hour. You want to do 10 to 15 minutes, every day when you're building handwriting skills. And I think there are a number of good curricula out there that are of benefit that I think can help with guidance. But I think, thinking about things like pencil grip, paper position, those motor pieces to get you comfortable. I had a teacher recently say, well, grip doesn't really matter. They can hold it however they want. And I walk into middle school classrooms and I can walk up to a child, with a cumbersome grip, and without exception, when I ask them, does your hand hurt when you write? The answer is yes. And also those kids tend to have the handwriting that the teacher says, please recopy, what have you, So we're really looking at those motor pieces, getting the handwriting comfortable, and then the letter formations will come more easily. But that sort of regular practice with handwriting, and I also, the multimodal or multisensory piece is also really important.
So saying it as you're
we're going to name the letters out loud as we write them. If we're spelling a word, we're going to say the sounds as we write them, and that adds not just the speech, but also hearing the sound or the letter as you form the letter and as you see the letter. So you're really activating everything.
Yeah. And so what about spelling?
So spelling's challenging, and sometimes principals are a little bit more difficult to convince about that. But one thing you're going to want to do with spelling is, and it may be embedded into an existing core curricula. There's some great spelling components of good core curricula out there. But one of the things you're going to want to do is organize the words by pattern, and that could be a phonological pattern. Something where the sounds are. It typically is something orthographic, so you might have a number of words that have the vowel team AI, for example, in the same lesson. And in that way, the kids who struggle with spelling, they can learn a pattern that goes with the words, not just sort of random what have you. So I would argue that the teachers who assign 10 words that don't really have a pattern in common, the highest level spellers, that's probably fine for them. They're really not going to suffer. They'll learn the words. They may even retain them. But the kids who need to know that the language is not illogical, that the language is not crazy, they really need to be shown the generalizations, the patterns. Wendy Ferrone did a lot of the work for us on patent with that, and thinking about how that language is organized, So actually, one of the things I recommend to teachers, and this is one of the things they have to explain to parents when they do this, is that on a spelling test, you wouldn't just give the words you've been working on. You would give them a few words the kids have never seen, which sounds completely unfair, but they would be words that are still part of the pattern.
So let's see if they can generalize and transfer that skill.
So that's the magic. The power is not the 10 words that you've memorized. The power is, can you apply that to other words that you encounter that you want to write? And that's a game changer. Those are really exciting. So, and when you explain that to parents, they're on board. But at first, it looks like, wait a minute, you're testing my kid on something he hasn't prepared for. And it's totally unfair. But it is fair because we're working on the pattern and we can generalize.
You want to see if they've internalized that pattern and can apply it elsewhere.
Absolutely.
And every case too, of course, going from least complex to most complex, right? So in handwriting, typically the similar strokes are taught together, and same thing with spelling patterns. We start with the most common and the easiest for kids, and then we move to more complex spelling patterns. Am I missing anything in transcription skills that we need to talk about? I don't know. We got to talk about spelling. We talked about handwriting.
I mean, maybe just I might put in a clap or whatever for word processing, and just say that although handwriting is really essential, and areas where they are discounting handwriting, that's too bad. And actually, there's quite a bit of turnaround. A number of states are passing legislation about handwriting. That's on the change in a good way. But that we're not neglecting word processing. And I worry a little bit that schools are going super pro-tech, and they have really interesting academic possibilities in computer, but that they're not learning good word processing or keyboarding skills. And the same automaticity problem is, if you're trying to write an essay and you're looking for the H, that's going to detract from what you're doing. So I think keyboarding skills, word processing skills, those are not out. And Virginia Berninger talks about hybrid writers, that we need to be good with handwriting and word processing, and especially in the 21st century. And I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind.
Okay, so one other thing, we'll take a little bit of a bird walk this year that you've added to the work that you're doing with us is around vocabulary and morphology. So can we just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I can talk about vocabulary all day. I was really excited to add these 2-day workshops for patent and vocabulary.
We have one coming up in April.
So we're doing one for, I think, the elementary. So vocabulary is a fascinating area, and it crosses into so many different things. And I've I've done some work with general vocabulary. Isabel Beck is one of the great sort of groundwork vocabulary experts in thinking about best practices and thinking about things that maybe we've been doing but are not best practices.
Right.
And then focusing in on morphology, on the fact that words are made up of bases and affixes, and how that builds not just meaning. So to know that, struct or struct means build, and how that might apply to other words that you don't know that have that in them, but also how it can affect spelling.
Yes.
Something like the two twin example I mentioned, or not too long ago I was
even
helping.
The ED.
ED, where jumped is one syllable, and where a
right.
typical kid would spell it JUMPT.
Yes.
And when you do that, you're thinking well, but you're thinking phonologically. You're thinking about that sound symbol, not about the meaning parts.
Yes, because that remains, and the thing with morphology is it remains stable.
Absolutely.
Right, so that's very exciting for
Yeah,
kids,
I was helping an older kid spell inspiration the other day, and the in inspiration is tricky. There are a lot of options.
Yes.
But if you can think of inspire in the word inspiration, it becomes an I.
clear.
You know it's an I, and you don't have to worry about is it an E, is it an A, all these different options.
Yeah. So we're lucky too to have you join us for the Patent Literacy Symposium, June 10th to 12th. Do you want to tell folks what you want to talk about then? Are you still thinking about it?
Yeah, we haven't figured that out yet. So you and I have not had a conversation yet.
Yeah.
No
matter what, it's going to be awesome.
Yeah, we might do morphology actually because we did syntax last time. We'll have to talk about it and think about that.
But William will be here June 10th to 12th. We're very excited to be partnering with him again next year, but also with the Patent Literacy Symposium and coming up with this vocabulary and morphology in April. Anything else you need to tell them about you? Okay.
Great.
All right. It was a great conversation.
Yep, enjoyed
which I
it.
knew it would be. So thank you so very much for watching this Leaders in Literacy webcast for Patent. And as always, thank you to John Ragsdale, our producer, who always does such a fabulous job. And we look forward to having you watch our future ones. Take care now.